Hello. This lecture is going to cover the Middle Ages. This is the first lecture for the second half of world history, which covers basically the pre-modern world. This lecture is going to cover the early Middle Ages, so it's going to set the stage for the rest of modern Europe. Um, and it's going to cover society, the bubonic plague, and the emergence of the Catholic Church on the European mainland. So I'm going to share my screen and get right to it. So the Middle Ages. It's a really weird time. Remember Rome, the, the western part of Rome has fallen. The eastern part has now turned into the Byzantine Empire, and there's just this huge rapid change in Europe. So this is the beginning. This is the early Middle Ages. So we have the decline of the Roman Empire. We have the rise of Northern Europe, and there's new forms of government. There's a heavy Romanization. So if you remember in last try, we talked a lot about the Hellenization, which is it's more of like a Greekness. This is a Romanness. So religion, language, laws, architecture, and government is all based on Rome. And Latin, which is the medieval avum, which means the Middle Age, and it is the source of the English word medieval, which is what most people call it, which is the medieval age of the European history. Anyway, so the early Middle Ages, so the Dark Ages, is from 500 CE to 1000 CE, and scholars name it this as a time when the forces of darkness, or barbarians, overwhelmed the forces of the light, which is the Romans. Now, there is some debate on whether or not barbarians are actual evil people, or they were just really angry with the Romans and decided that they were done with them and wanted to establish their own homeland. There's definitely room for debate there, for sure. And it's even fair to even say that barbarian is an unfair term. The Romans called them barbarians because they were obviously raiding their border, but that doesn't mean that they were actually mean, savage, and crazy people that you see on television. They were sophisticated. The Vikings, for example, were not. They were, obviously angry and they killed a lot of people, just like you see, but they were also very sophisticated, and they were civilized in their own way. So the rise of the influence of barbarians, as Roman emperors had granted barbarian mercenaries land inside the Roman Empire in return for military service. And it was these barbarians who eventually became the new rulers of Roman land. So this is the barbarian migration and invasion of the Roman Empire. The early cross-border raids of neighboring peoples gave way to migrations of starving and terrified barbarian allies looking for safety within the borders of Rome. By the 5th century, large-scale raids by the Huns and the Vandals reached throughout the Western Empire, resulting in permanent settlements and a collapse of the Roman system of government. So we have the Anglo-Saxons who go to Britain. The Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, kind of is able to set up on its own government and system south of the Danube River, but the rest, and Rome, gets sacked multiple times by these people, by these barbarians, quote unquote. Anyway, so the Western Roman Empire really suffers. So the period of change in Western Europe as barbarians were migrating into areas was given up by the Romans. And as more barbarians moved westward, other tribes were forced to move as well. These groups were categorized by languages and very little else. So the Celtic were the Gauls, the Britons, and the Bretons. The Germanic were the Goths, the Franks, the Vandals, and the Saxons. And the Slavics were the Wends. So they're grouped up not by culture, but by a system of language. So language defines these people, not their traditions and their customs. And that's fascinating in and itself, because Europe is not a very big place. There's a lot that happens in Europe, as you're going to see in this class. But really, what defines the Europeans is culture, of course, but mainly it's language and the ability to speak languages. So this is the Roman Empire and the barbarian migrations. So this is just another example of some of the things that the barbarians went through. And I think it's really cool to note that in Britain, this northern part, modern day Scotland, is actually more native than the English part, or England. Same with Ireland, until the Danes come over. The Vikings, sorry, until the Vikings come over. The Dane is the more proper word, but you're going to understand the word Viking a little bit more clear. Anyway, this is also another just really good map that just kind of shows the color. So the former city of Byzantium becomes the new capital and control the center of the Roman Empire. Constantinople is right here, by the way, in case you didn't know. It was the largest city by population in the world west of China. And the strategic location was on trade routes. It's literally it's that little strait. It connects the Middle East and Asia to the mainland of Europe. It's one of the largest natural harbors in the world, and it's linked to both the east and the west. The Byzantine gold coin, or the byzant, was the main currency of international trade throughout the world, the known world. The ruled provinces by Roman model, governors, bureaucracy, and the imperial army, heavy taxation, and the favoring of the royal family and priests in trade and in taxes. So this is the Byzantine Empire by 814. By the 9th century, the empire lost all of its territories but Asia Minor, Greece, the boot of Italy, and the islands of Sardinia, and Sicily. So here's Sardinia, Sicily. The Duchy of Benevento is here. And this is the Byzantine Empire. It does expand at its height all the way into Jerusalem and in provinces in Arabia and some of Alexandria and ancient Egypt. So the expanding influence of the church. So during this time, the Christian church has become an important political, economic, spiritual, and cultural force on the mainland of Europe. Leading officials of the church were the Pope and the Patriarch. The banning of heresy, which is holding beliefs that contradict the official religion. So this is where we get the burning of witches and wizards, witchcraft and wizardry, and all of that stuff. This starts during this time. And then there's conversion by force. They would literally strap you, torture you until you converted to Christianity. And eventually in the 11th century, the church split into two independent branches. The Eastern Orthodox, which is the more Greek, which was based in Constantinople, and the Roman Catholic, which is based in Rome, which still prevails today, which is the Catholic Church. So you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. So the church was granted favors by Roman emperors, kings, land, and exemption from taxes, immunity in courts, positions in courts, and in return the church would endorse kings to help secure their rule. So remember, the church is the education for the community. So if the king is supported by the church, then the community usually supports the king because that's what the church tells them to do, which is pretty fascinating. This system has a flip side, though, and we'll talk about that when we get to the Crusades. So the kings looked to the church to supply educated administrators to help run kingdoms, and in return, kings would enforce laws that prohibited other religions within their realm. So monks were people who gave up worldly possessions and devoted themselves to a religious life. It was established, this system was established between 400 and 700, and communities called monasteries, which became centers of education, literacy, and learning. The strict codes of monastic conduct, called the Rule of Saint Benedict, was called the Rule of Saint Benedict and Saints, one who performs miracles that are interpreted as evidence of a special relationship with God. Saint Augustine wrote the Confessions, which discuss the ideas of ethics, self-knowledge, and the role of free will, which shaped monastic tradition for generations and even into today. Justinian the Great ruled from 527 to 565, and he was a Byzantine emperor, and the goal to reunite the Roman world as a Christian empire and suppressed all paganism. Paganism means anything but Christian, by the way. We're going to hear that a lot from now on. So paganism is anything but Christian. And it ordered the codification of Roman laws and Justinian Code, or a body of civil law. This is important, that defined civil law in the Middle Ages and into the modern world. It crushed the Nicaea riot with the help of his wife, Theodora. During his reign, Latin was the official language of the Byzantine Empire, but was later changed to Greek. Another difference between the two, rulers. So this is now the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century. So earlier, remember, it was just this little bitty area right near Constantinople in Asia Minor. Now it has expanded and grown under Justinian the Great and reaches into, hold on, sorry, let me annotate here. So it reaches now into Mesopotamia and this region down in here, in ancient Egypt and in North Africa and in parts of the Visigothic and Frankish kingdoms. They've also been able to take portions of Rome, the old Roman Empire, and into the Balkans. Just so you know, the Byzantine Empire will probably peak right around this area here. Okay? This will be the Byzantine Empire that you will come to be more familiar with as we go along. Okay? So the Merovingians. The Merovingian is derived from the leader of the tribe of the Franks in the first dynasty after the Romans and ruled for 300 years. Let me go back here. This becomes the Frankish kingdom, which is right here between in the Loire, the Rhine, and the mountains here that separate Spain. So this right here becomes the Frankish Empire. Okay, sorry. The leader in 481 CE was Clovis I, and he united the Frankish tribes and expanded territory. His conversion to Christianity won him support from the church, and Clovis wrote the Salic Law, which assigned a specific financial value to everyone and everything. It's a concept of trial options, or trial by oath and a trial by ordeal. The Merovingians founded and built many monasteries, churches, and palaces, and spread Christianity throughout Western Europe. The impact is eventually the dynasty declined as kings relaxed power and became more like figureheads, whereas the real power lay with the powerful officials and the leading aristocracy within the kingdom. And this is the Frankish kingdom in 768. And then the Byzantine Empire is down here. So then we have the Carolingians, which kind of like evolve out of the Merovingians. So the rise of the aristocratic Charles Martel, who dominated Frankish kingdom in the 8th century. He confiscated land given to the church and began church reforms that would restore spirituality to clerical life. His son, Pepin the Short, continued church reforms and eventually, with the support of the Reformed Church, removed the last Merovingian king from the throne and established the Carolingian dynasty, which named to protect the papacy. The papacy is the Pope, or the Catholic Church, and established the Pope and bishops as makers of kings. The greatest legacy was Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, who was a military general and restored Pope Leo III, who had been exiled from Rome. And in return, Leo placed a crown on Charlemagne and named him the Emperor of the Romans. This is pretty big, guys. Which secured the relationship between the Frankish kings and the papacy. Charlemagne became the first ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, a dynasty that would last for more than 700 years. And Charlemagne imposed order on the empire through the church and through the state, and ordered the standardization of Latin, textbooks, manuals for preaching, schools for clergy and for citizens, and a new form of handwriting. All of these promoted education in scholars and produced a precise written language for all people, which was Latin. The division of Charlemagne's empire and internal tensions, dynastic competition, and external pressures led to the disintegration of Charlemagne's empire and the emergence of what would become France and Germany. Woo! So, slaves and serfs. Slaves made up of conquered peoples. Some were treated harshly, while others were treated fairly. Rural slaves became serfs who worked the land and provided labor for the owner in return for protection from enemies. And they set up a system of feudalism. So this is now we're going to get into more of the culture and society of the Middle Ages. So this is the birth of modern languages, which is the development of the Middle Age. New languages were born through migration, resettlement, conflict, and changes. The Old English, or the Anglo-Saxon, began to incorporate words borrowed from Latin and Old French, Old German, and Old Norse. Roots of contemporary Spanish, Italian, and other Roman languages began to take root during this age as well. In the High Middle Ages, a new royal dynasty called the Capetians in France, they come up with a system of primogeniture, which is a system where the oldest son inherits everything instead of dividing land or property or wealth. Lords and knights, however, had little loyalty and began to competing more fiercely for land, power, influence, and control. And a peace of God is set up, which is a set of decrees issued in 989 CE that prohibited the stealing of church property, assaulting clerics, peasants, and women, and with the threat of excommunication from the church and a sentencing to hell. These were set to protect the unarmed populace by limiting warfare in the countryside. The Truce of God was set up in 1027 CE, and it outlawed all fighting from Thursday to Monday morning on important feast days and during religious days. The truce encouraged the idea that the only combat pleasing to God was in defense of Christendom. The idea of the righteousness of holy war. This becomes important with the Crusades. It's also kind of like The Purge. If you've never seen that movie, just check it out. So feudalism is set up like this. It's an increasing violence and lawless countryside and a weak turn to a strong for protection and a strong want for something from the weak. Feudalism is a relationship between those ranked in a chain of association. So it's a class structure. It's a class system. Kings, vandals, lords, knights, and serfs. Feudalism worked because of the notion of mutual obligation or voluntary cooperation from serf to noble. A man's word was the cornerstone of social life. Key terms is a fief, which is a land given by a lord in return for a vassal's military service and oath of loyalty. A serf is an AKA a villein or a common peasant who worked the lord's land. And the tithe, which is is a tax that serfs pay, tax or rent. And a corvée is a condition of unpaid labor by serfs, maintaining roads or ditches or on a manor. So this is the graph, right, of feudalism. So it's known mainly in Europe, but it's also documented in ancient Japan. It's a system of land management. There's three parts to understand: the workers, the land, the nobles, the serfs, and then the nobles are called lords, and then the vassals managed lands for the lords, and then they became vassal through an act of homage. That's what it's called. So we have the king, who gives charters and privileges to towns and gives lands and titles to nobles. Nobles provide soldiers, towns provide soldiers who then serve the king. And okay, so this is complicated because if kings don't make the nobles happy, the nobles revolt and put a new king on the throne. So it just becomes it's like a system. It's like a checks and balances of a class system, and the only people that really don't matter are the people at the bottom, who are the normal people, the peasants, the serfs. Everybody else just fights and just does all of these things. And really what I want you to take out of this is that the peasants are at the bottom, the king's at the top, the nobles are in the middle, the soldiers are below the nobles, and the nobles can also change the king, so that's fluid. But the main people that stay the same are the peasants. So here's some wars and conflicts that happened during this time. So the War of Investiture, which is Pope Gregory the Seventh, and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry the Fourth. There's the Norman conquests of William the Conqueror, who was crowned King of England and ordered the Doomsday Book. Magna Carta is a king is subject to law. The Crusades. The effects of Crusades are military failure, but many positive effects: the spreading of culture, cultural exchange, goods, scientific knowledge, the Arabic language and thought, economic growth in rural communities, and trade. So the effects of the Crusades: guilt in communes, towns, cities, and manors. There's new thinkers, Thomas Aquinas, and writers, the creation of universities, new art and architecture, Gothic and castles, knighthood and chivalry, courtly entertainment, plays, and there's this huge emergence of culture. So in the late Middle Ages, the Black Death, which is a devastating worldwide pandemic that first struck Europe in the mid-14th century, and it killed about a third of Europe's population, an estimated 34 million people. Called the Black Death because of the striking symptom of the disease, in which sufferers' skin would blacken due to hemorrhages under the skin, spread by fleas and rats, and a painful lymph node swelling called buboes. Buboes in the groin and armpits, which ooze pus and blood, and it's a damage to the skin and the underlying tissues until they were covered in dark blotches. Most victims died within 4 to 7 days after getting the infection. And the effects is called massive depopulation and change in the social structure. It weakened the influence of the church throughout Europe. and originated in Asia, but was blamed on Jews and lepers. And it was because of it, Jews were heavily tortured because of this plague. So this is the path of the Black Death. It starts along these coasts, so it's brought through trade, and then it expands across the mainland rapidly. So this is an illustration of the Black Death in 1411. So Roger Bacon invents, during this time though, there's still some innovation. Roger Bacon invents gunpowder. Luca Piccoli, this is the father of accounting. Johannes Gutenberg is the printing press. Christine de Pizan is a writer, and Geoffrey Chaucer is also a writer. Joan of Arc of the 100 Years' War. Pope Urban II, indulgences. Pope Innocent IV and Bernard Guy, inquisitions. And parliamentary government in England is established in England. So here's some pictures of that. And that's it. Until next time, we will, the next lecture, we'll discuss the Viking Age and the Crusades. So have a good day, and then I'll see you next time.